topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon, New York and New Jersey. Welcome to another Ask the Experts, where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. I am your host today, Steve-O. We have got such an incredible show today. Once we do about 50 shows a week, and once in a while you come across an expert who you just really enjoy interviewing. You know that the audience is really understanding, especially when we have attorneys and doctors. But I know a lot of this has to do with this attorney. He has been doing TV and radio for a long time. We're talking about taxes today. Let me welcome you to Attorney Stephen Moskowitz. Good afternoon, Stephen.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here, and it's nice to be back in New York, from whence I originally came.
I got to tell you, we've gotten like 4 or 5 text messages from viewers. First of all, thanking us for bringing a show like this, but most of all, thanking us for our expert who you are and the way you explain things. You should have been a professor.
I was for 10 years.
No wonder. Because you explain things where people can understand. You don't talk over their heads. But most of the text messages we got were people who say you make a person not feel like a criminal who has not paid their taxes.
You're not a criminal. You're not an axe murderer. You just didn't pay your taxes. And take a look at all the debt the United States government is in. So the bottom line is there's so much here. This is so affecting so many people, all walks of life. I represent people from all walks of life. It's like a medical doctor. You know, if certain illnesses, it doesn't matter what you do for a living. You can be anything and that illness can hit you. And here we're dealing with the taxes. And, you know, when you owe taxes, sometimes it feels like somebody pushed you off a pier. You don't know how to swim. The water's over your head. You think you're going to drown. You don't know what to do. You're panicking. And it doesn't have to be. And what you want to do is avoid the extremes. The extremes are the IRS sends you, they're the IRS. They must be right. Here's my check. To the, well, I don't have the money, or I don't know about this, or just throwing it away. You know, a lot of people ignore it. I've had a lot of clients, they'll march into my office with a stack of unopened letters from the IRS. I used to keep the letter open. Let's see what was going on here. And the bottom line is there's a lot of good solutions. And the very first thing we do is we listen to you. We hear your story. We hear your needs from business, personal, family. And then the fact that the IRS sent you a bill for $1 zillion doesn't mean that you owe $1 zillion. The very first thing we do, and you know, before I was a tax attorney, I was a CPA. And before that, I had a very prestigious job in New York City in transportation, but it did cause me to move around a lot. I was a New York City taxi cab driver. So I'm basically a simple guy that has looked at things from all different points of view. I understand what it is running a small or medium-sized business, because that's what I do. And oftentimes,
Stephen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you were going to say something? Oftentimes those bills are wrong. And how can they be wrong? First of all, it's very common when you owe taxes for people not to file a tax return. And they didn't file it in the first year because they didn't have the money. That's the number one reason. Number two reason is they didn't have the records, or there was some change. They got divorced and the spouse took care of the taxes, or the bookkeeper left, or
Oh, we
something
seem to
happened.
lost. There he is. He's back. Okay.
And what's happened is we say, well, okay, we can get all the records, the IRS, and if you're in a state that taxes, the state has on you. And if you can't pay the taxes, that's okay, we can make a deal. But the bottom line is, so many times those bills the IRS send are wrong. For example, if you haven't filed the tax returns, one of the things the IRS does is something called an SFR, substitute for return. That's where they go ahead and they just make something up. Oftentimes, they make up something that's way more than you really owe. Or, for example, you sold your house and you didn't report that on your tax return. So the IRS has a report of that. So they tax you on the gross sales price, not the net, not after exclusions. So the bottom line is sometimes the simple expedience of just filing the return will fix a major part of the problem, if not all of it. But let's take the worst case. Let's assume the IRS sends you a bill for $1 zillion. You don't owe a zillion. You owe way less than a zillion. You just owe X. And we say, oh, well, okay. We talk to the IRS. Hi, guys. My client doesn't owe a zillion. Here's why he doesn't owe a zillion. He only owes X. And they say, okay, we'll bring the bill down to X. And I say, good. Thank you very much. By the way, he can't pay X either. Then we have all kinds of different options. For example, there's something called offer in compromise. So what's an offer in compromise? It's great. It's where you offer the government to take part and they forgive the rest. Sometimes people call this pennies on the dollar. So there's three bases for getting an offer in compromise. The first one is called doubt as to collectability. Or in English, you don't have the income and assets pay the taxes. So we go to the government and we say, look, I know my guy owes you all this money. He just doesn't have it. Let's make it deal. So suppose, for example, you owed $1 million and the best you could do is $10,000. If the government accepts it, you walk away from the $990. It just poof, goes away like magic. The government writes it off. It's an offer in compromise. It's wonderful. So that's the first thing we look at is, do you have the income and assets?
Do you have to prove that to them, Stephen?
So we're filing forms under penalty of perjury where they ask you all the nosy questions. They ask you to reveal all your assets. So that's what you're supposed to do. And there's a lot of other factors too that I'm going to get up to when we get into the second and the third way, especially the third way. But the first way is you don't have the income and assets. This is common. For example, a lot of times, somebody had a great job. They had a job of a lifetime, but for some reason they lose it. Well, now they have a new job, but the new job doesn't pay anywhere where the old job does, but you owe taxes based on the old job. That would be a good ground for this. For example, I had a client who was a stockbroker and he was making about $600,000 a year. He got into a little trouble and he couldn't be a stockbroker anymore. And he wound up getting a job for much less money. And that's what we base this on. If he just doesn't have the money, he's not going to be able to pay you. Other things that we take a look at. So that's the first one. We don't have the income and assets. Second one is doubt as to liability. Here, it doesn't matter what your income and assets are. So Jeff Bezos over at Amazon could use this one, even though he's a billionaire, because it's not that, he has billions and billions, and let's say the IRS wants $10,000 from him. It's not that Jeff doesn't have the 10,000 many times over, but he says, I don't owe it, and I don't owe it because, and that's the second way to get out of it. And the third ground is going to sound the most strange. it would be unfair to collect the taxes. Whoa, unfair? Well, IRS? What are we talking about here? And by the way, if you are going to enter into a deal where you make a payment to them, it's nice if you can write the check, or Uncle Louie can write the check for you. But even on this with offer and compromise, they'll take monthly payments over years and still write off the rest. And then the third ground, the compassionate ground, suppose you have a nice amount of money in your bank account. You say, that's terrific. But suppose your spouse is sick and your spouse needs medical treatment that's not covered by your insurance. And say, look, I could write you a check because I have more than that in my account. But if I do that, I won't have enough money to pay the medicals for my spouse and she'll die. Or some other compelling ground. So the bottom line is, when somebody comes in the office, or now the Zoom, because of the remote working, it's, well, first of all, do you owe the taxes? And a lot of times they don't, or a lot of times they only owe part of it, or maybe we have to do something like file the returns or check something else, or maybe there was just some mistake made. For example, a lot of people are a victim of identity theft. And suppose somebody is using your Social Security number. If you have an identity thief, they're not going to worry about paying the taxes. They have your Social Security number. And the IRS says, hey, Steve-O, you didn't pay your taxes on your winnings at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. Say, well, I've never been there. What are you talking about? So correct that. So the bottom line—
Does that happen?
All the time. Unfortunately, identity theft is common. And what will happen with identity theft, the people that do that, they'll take a job or make an investment in somebody else's number. And so what about the name? Everything in the IRS is filed by Social Security number. So suppose John Smith stole the Social Security number of Sally Jones. And he goes to work for General Motors, and he says, hi, my name's John Smith, and here's my Social Security number. Doesn't the IRS know that Social Security number belongs to Sally? Everything is just filed in Sally's number. And then Sally gets a bill. Hey, Sally, you didn't pay your taxes on General Motors. Well, wait a minute. I've never worked for General Motors. I've had a number of cases like that. These things happen. Another thing that happens is that people make up Social Security numbers by the millions. Who would do such a thing? Well, people that are in this country illegally and they go for a job, they make up a Social Security number. Or there are factories that provide counterfeit Social Security numbers. Or you have a situation where somebody makes an honest mistake, they transpose a number. And what happens is, with millions and millions of people making up a Social Security number, it'll be somebody's real number. And I've had those cases where, look, what are you talking about? I never heard of this company, much less work for them. So the bottom line is we correct it. And one of the things is sometimes we just have to talk to the IRS. Now, if you take a look in the general news, the IRS does not answer the majority of their calls. They just don't. They were bragging to Congress they've gotten a little bit better, but the majority they still don't answer. And the other thing is they also have a lot of part-time workers, tax assisters, who may not be the most expert in the tax law. You say, well, how do you get through to them? The IRS provides special numbers to tax professionals. So the numbers that we call are reserved for tax professionals only, so the general public doesn't have them. That's how we get through, and a lot of times people can't. Because I'll hear from clients, it's so frustrating. For hours and hours I tried to call and I couldn't get through to anybody. Or sometimes you'll get through and you'll hold for a while and then they'll hang up on you. It's frustrating. So the bottom line is, that's dealing with government work. And that's why originally I got speakerphones for all my employees, because even with the special numbers, we could be on hold quite a while. And you can do other work while you're waiting for the agent to come on the line. Or if it's an agent we've worked with a lot and we have each other's cell phone numbers, that really speeds things up because you're helping each other. So the bottom line is, if you can't pay your taxes and if you do owe something, there's a lot of good solutions. One of them is the offer and compromise. But you say, well, what if I don't qualify for an offer and compromise? Not everybody does. Another thing we want to take a look at are penalty abatements. What happens with penalty abatements is that you ask the government to forgive the penalty. And sometimes the penalties and the interest are more than the taxes. Well, let's have an example of some penalties. Suppose you don't file your return. The penalty for that is 5% of the tax a month up to a max of 25%. So if you filed a tax return late and you owe the IRS $10,000, IRS says, okay, well now you owe $12,500 because $10,000 on the tax plus $2,500
Right.
to file penalty. Then we get into the failure to pay penalty, which increases every month up to a max of 25% also. And then we add interest on top of both of those, and all of a sudden you feel like you owe some money to a loan shark. So we ask for forgiveness of penalties. What's grounds? Now, according to the IRS, if you read the official stuff, anything can be a ground for penalty abatement. And one of the grounds is medical problems for the taxpayer or the close family members. For example, if you didn't file your tax return because you were in a coma, that's an excellent, and I'm sure if you were in a coma, God forbid, the first thing you would do when you woke up, oh my God, I got to file my tax return. I mean, isn't that what everybody would say? But the bottom line is that's an excellent reason. Or somebody in the family, the spouse, or the close family members, not the third cousin on the grandmother's side, but close family members, your kids, your parent. Then we take a look at, it could be all the types of things. Substance abuse is now considered to be a disability. So if you have somebody that has a drug or alcohol problem or gambling problem or other problem, where you say, look, your kid was addicted to drugs and you were busy trying to help your kid, and I'm sorry you didn't do a return, they can forgive that. Or any other good reason. For example, suppose your business took a turn for the worse, or one day the boss, you came home and told your wife that you will not work for any man who said to you what your boss said to you today. And the wife asks, what did your boss say to you? You're fired. You got fired, or you got laid off. Look at all the big companies. Look at all the layoffs. And big companies are laying off all kinds of people. Jobs that used to look so good, like tech jobs, and boy, you're in tech, all of a sudden they're having these mass layoffs. So the bottom line is we say, well, okay, situation like that. So any type of reasonable, and the way to think about it with penalty abatement, if you have a good reason, you can qualify. Suppose you said to me, Steve, I'm going to invite you to my house tomorrow for dinner at 8 o'clock. I say, wonderful, I'll be right over at 8 o'clock sharp. And tomorrow you spend all day cooking and you prepare this sumptuous gourmet meal. 8 o'clock comes, there's no knock on the door. 8:15, I haven't heard from you. 8:39, midnight, I don't show up and I don't call you. Would you be mad at me? I bet you would. Would you invite me back to your house for another dinner? Don't think you would. But suppose a month later I called you up and said, I was driving to your house and a big tractor trailer hit me and I've been in a hospital bed unconscious for a month. Would you forgive me and invite me back? So you see, and that's what I teach my students. It's the facts that are so important. Why did you do or didn't do the act? If you have a good reason, you can be forgiven. If it's, I forgot it was, the big game and I didn't show up, that'd be a reason to never invite me back. But something like you were in the hospital and you couldn't speak to anybody, that's and that's the way penalty abatements go. So what happens is people always talk about the IRS, the IRS, the IRS. The monolith, the IRS, doesn't make any decisions. It's a human being that's an employee of an organization called the IRS. So one human being talks to another human being and says, look, here's why my client did this or didn't do that. And that's old-fashioned lawyering. And that's one of the things that I used to tell the new lawyers, the law students. And sometimes, I would tell the students, it's not just all about learning the statutes. And you can always tell a new guy from a seasoned guy because, a lot of times new guys are always referring to the section number. Well, under section 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. I said, when you get in practice, one of the things you're going to learn is something that I call the come on rule. At some point in your career, you're going to say to the other side, come on. Something happened. Some kid got sick and the guy didn't file his tax return or something happened. So the bottom line, it's the human, and there's still a lot of that in law practice. And again, when I was professor, what I would explain to new lawyers is, look, the law is alive. It lives, it breathes, it cries, it laughs. And you have people's lives in your hands. And you talk to somebody and you explain things. And that's a large part of lawyering. So we talk about penalty abatement. Another thing we can do is something called a hardship deferral. Hardship deferral is where the government just leaves you alone till you're back on your feet. So suppose you get the bill. So client comes in, here's the bill, IRS says I owe X. And we determine, yep, you really owe this, all right. But the guy just lost his job. And what if he has some money in the bank so he could withdraw the money from the savings account and pay the tax? But he has a non-working spouse and 3 kids at home and a mortgage. And you say, well, look, I understand my guy. And again, the IRS is not an unthinking, unfeeling monolith. You talk to somebody. You say, look, my client has a wife and 3 kids. And yes, he does have some money in the bank. But I don't know how long it's going to take him to get a new job. He needs to use that money to pay the mortgage and buy food for the family. When he gets the new job, we'll pay you then on a monthly payment plan. Usually they'll go for that. So, a lot of times it's common sense things too, a hardship deferral where they just leave you alone. If you stick your head in the sand, especially now with all these new IRS agents, they'll do something to you. Well, what can they do to you? Well, they can withdraw the money from your bank account. Well, won't they give you a warning before they do that? Usually not, because people would take the money away first. It's a sneak attack. You don't stay with a sneak attack. Next Thursday at noontime, I'm going to sneak up on you with a hammer and hit you in the back of the head. It's a sneak attack. And the other thing is you can't ignore them. It's just like if you have chest pains, you don't ignore it. Now, I hope it's gas if you have chest pains, but you can't ignore it. And the cardiologist will know if it's gas or it's something more serious. And you deal with that. And another real big one is a monthly payment plan. And I see we're almost out of time. Maybe we should pick that up next time we talk and we explain that, because that's a very common one.
Stephen, what made you decide you were a CPA, you're an attorney? What made you decide to go into this side?
Good question. So I was before I set foot in law school as a student, I was a practicing CPA working for a big fancy firm. And I already had a master's and bachelor's degree in accounting. The clients of the big fancy firm were the Fortune 500. I was dazzled at the incredible money these companies made, and legally were paying little or no taxes. I said, oh my God, how do you do that? And I was sure that you didn't have to just be Fortune 500 to do that. That's why I went to law school, not to do divorces, chase ambulances, get axe murderers off. I wanted to know how you could make all this money and legally not pay taxes. And I found out the secret. Here's the secret. In a democracy, the government can't order us to do something, even if it's good for the economy and the government wants you to do it. So how's the government get you to do something that they want you to do, but they can't order you to do it? They pay us for it. They pay us through tax benefits. And what I call is the magic business card. Suppose, Steve-O, I went to your office and I said, I have a magic business card here. Take this down to the IRS and they'll give you a check for $1 million. I bet you'd take that card right on down to the IRS and collect your $1 million, wouldn't you? But suppose instead of just handing you the magic business card, I went out and I rented the biggest dump truck I could find. And I put the magic business card in the back of the dump truck. And then I took all the regular business cards and I poured them into the dump truck. I waited for you to go out to lunch. You went out to lunch. I backed up to your door. I dumped the truck and I filled your office with regular business card and the one magic business card. You come back from lunch, say, oh my God, some vandal put all these business cards in my office. I'll have to call some trash company and have it called away. So you call the trash company and you say, hey, come to my office. Trash company comes, you pay them, and they haul away all the business cards, including the magic business card. You wouldn't throw away $1 million if you knew you were throwing away $1 million. But my example, you throw because you know is there. If you understand that concept, you understand the law, because there's all these gems hidden in there. And wealthy people, Fortune 500, they have an army of people like me that say, okay, there's a magic business card here and a magic business card here and a magic business. Here's the magic business cards. Go take them down to the IRS. That's what happens. That's the law. So basically all of tax planning is tax incentives, and it works. And a lot of those incentives are good. For example, to establish a retirement account for yourself, and lots of other things. And accelerating depreciation, where you get a benefit, but you don't write a check for it. I could go on and on and on, but I know we have to pay attention to the clock. I
got to tell you, this show could easily be an hour long. We love doing the show with you.
It could be a day long and I'd still be going.
You're a world of information. Let's give everybody that easy phone number.
You can call us toll free at 888-TAX-DEAL. That's 888-TAX-DEAL, 888-TAX-DEAL. Or visit us online at moskowitzllp.com, moskowitzllp.com. We're a medium-sized law firm. We also have accountants, CPAs, and we're here for you.
Stop putting those unopened letters from the IRS in that drawer. They're not going to go away. We have a wonderful person who can help you with your problem. Stephen, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. This is great fun for me. You know, I love talking about taxes.
Stephen will be back with us again next month with more Ask the Experts. And we'll see you next week with more experts. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. God bless.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.